Pranay, welcome to the show. Great to have you.
Hey, super excited to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to diving in. I love your mission, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. But before we do that, you're a doctor. You're an active practicing doctor. You're practicing medicine. So I'm just going to ask you, why did you decide to go into medicine?
Yeah, it's kind of the story. I was 5 years old, and I have Asian immigrant parents, and they always want us to be, doctor, lawyer, engineer. My dad's an engineer, and I was never really good at physics or math, but science, I just really liked understanding how things worked, right? And if it was biology, chemistry, it's just an understanding of how things worked, and then just being able to help people. We had to go to the hospital a couple of times when we were younger, and I just had such a great experience of people taking care of us, people being empathetic, sympathetic, and I wanted to be able to kind of give back in the future. And so, really, always had a mind on wanting to do medicine, but also. Um, and we can talk about this a little later, is most people that go into medicine, just all they care about is medicine. Later on they are interested in other stuff, but I always had a ton of different interests. So medicine was the goal, but I didn't want to have to give up everything else to do medicine.
Yeah, let's definitely dive into that a little bit further because you're definitely doing something else. And maybe when did you start to think about that? As you started practicing medicine. What field are you in, by the way?
Yeah, so I'm in internal medicine. I
Okay,
work as a hospitalist. So if you ever have to go to the ER and they say, hey, you need to spend a couple nights in the hospital, then I'd be your doctor after that.
you're the guy. You're the guy that
Yeah.
comes in the room. Okay,
Yeah,
got it.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
It's good to know. So when did you start thinking about some of your other passions that you have and some of the other things that you wanted to do, and what was your next move?
Yeah, so I actually always did that. If you listen to the second episode of my podcast, it kind of goes through my journey. And most people think that a lot of successful people have this kind of straight line, especially in medicine, because there's a pretty well trodden path to become a doctor. Mine was all over the place. So, for example, I worked as a molecular biochemist in college. I worked as a oceanologist in college at Scripps Oceanography, which is one of the premier locations for doing that. I did in medical school. I did some art shows to raise money for Doctors Without Borders, and so I've just always been interested in other stuff. Kind of in medical school and residency, I kind of had to give up some of that stuff, but uh, eventually I was able to find it back. And actually, so I applied for fellowship, which is further training in medicine after I finished residency.
Mhm.
And I didn't get it. And some of the what people said was like, yeah, your application looks like it's all over the place. Like it doesn't look like you have a singular focus on trying to get into fellowship. I was like, yeah, I have a lot of interest, and I think that makes you a stronger doctor, but other people don't believe that.
I agree. I don't have any experience in the medical field, but I think it's just important to have other interests and be well rounded. And you definitely are. What did you start to when you started to get into real estate? I want to talk about your real
Mhm.
estate business a little bit. We'll get to your podcast as well because your mission is just super awesome. As I had mentioned, um, when did you start thinking about real estate, and maybe share with us like how you got your first how you got your first deal?
Yeah. So, once you become a doctor, you make a pretty decent salary, right? Probably 150 to 200, which is pretty good. And the thought is like, what do I do with that money to help it grow? Right. Everyone puts it in the stock market, but I wanted something that had more control. Right. And real estate really has created the most millionaires and multimillionaires ever in the US. Right.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. And I know you had a real estate business as well. And so I decided I wanted to buy one. And, a lot of times in business, you kind of look for your advantage, right? The advantage that you can have that other people don't have, right? And my advantage was my sister-in-law was a real estate agent and a really good one, right? So I found my first property. What I would do is there's something called MLS, which is basically a listing service for real estate. If you guys have a real estate agent, you probably have had them send you a listing. So I had her send me listings, and I actually work nights at the hospital. So for some reason, real estate agents always like to post their stuff in the middle of the night. So I saw a property at like 2 a.m. And I was at work. I texted my sister-in-law 7 a.m. I went to go look at it right after my shift. I was in scrubs. I hadn't showered. I felt gross and sleepy, but I went to go look at it, put an offer down, and we were the first ones. After we had looked at it, a bunch of other offers came in even higher than ours. But because I was the quickest, they gave it to me.
Nice. Now, is it a single family property?
It's a 4 unit actually in Long
Four
Beach.
unit. Okay. Awesome.
Yeah,
Awesome.
yeah,
Awesome.
yeah, yeah.
So maybe just talk a little bit more about that. I mean, that's being aggressive, right? Like you're and opportunistic. You know, you knew that the agents like to list in the middle of the night, which I don't think I ever knew. And then you just jumped all over it. You got the deal. And talk about maybe the property. Did you have to do any work to it? Did you rehab? Did you turn it over?
No, no, it was a great property. We had to do minimal renovations. The guy he was in construction, so he was
Mm.
doing all his own stuff. I had a property manager kind of handle everything, and it was great. It was cash flowing right away. You can't really find properties like that anymore, and that's why I don't do active real estate as much.
Right, right. Yeah. So this was a while back then.
Yeah, yeah. This was in 2018. I had just graduated first year. I had paid off my loans, and I wanted to start investing.
Awesome. Do other doctors feel similarly about their money, or is it like singular focused on just practicing medicine?
Yeah, and slowly curriculums in medicine are changing to add some more finance, but
Hmm.
financially speaking, most of us we're like infants, right? Or maybe elementary school because we
Yeah.
have this big paycheck and we don't know what to do with it. And unfortunately, a lot of people will get targets on their back, right? So whole life insurance or these financial products that just have a ton of fees and don't make a ton of sense for doctors. So at least in the beginning, people should do their retirement accounts, index funds, and that stuff. And after that, they can kind of see what else is out there, like real estate.
Yeah. Which is like you said, creates more millionaires than anything else in this country, which is absolutely true. Let's talk about your podcast and your mission. Again, your mission is to help 10,000 or launch 10,000 physician led businesses. So you want to help other doctors um, start their own business. And that's what your podcast is about. So talk a little bit about your show, and I'm excited to listen to it.
Yeah. So, I've worked at a couple different startups. So there's one called Passive Income MD that I would recommend to everyone for
Mhm.
really financial literacy. And then that was started by Dr. Peter Kim, who's my partner. And we started Ascent Equity Group, which is a real estate company for doctors that don't have the time to focus on investing in real estate. And actually, you were talking about my last real estate property. And the reason I don't do it is because I spent hundreds of hours trying to find another property and I just couldn't find one that was good enough,
Yeah. Yeah.
and all that time was just wasted. So we decided to create a company that lets people invest in large apartment complexes like 200, 300 units. You get economies of scale and leverage and all that stuff. So we created that company, and it's nice having control of your life, And we also created a physician accelerator called Leverage and Growth Accelerator, which teaches doctors how to start a business and give them the tools like newsletters and everything that's associated with businesses. And so the podcast is really to give inspiration and the tools to be able to start in entrepreneurship. Because in the starting, it's just hard to know what you want to do, right? You have a ton of interests. You've probably had a bunch of interests 10 years ago, and now you don't even know what you're interested in. So some doctors are really good at writing, other people are doing products.
Yeah.
And if we've seen anything in the past 2 years, that more doctor-led businesses would make the world a better place, right? So we've seen all the vaccines and just a lot of stuff in healthcare that we think we can improve.
Awesome. I love it. What's the name of the show?
Yeah, it's called From MD to Entrepreneur.
From MD to Entrepreneur, which is what
Yeah.
you are. And let's give the site to the listeners where they can go, follow the podcast.
Yeah, it's simple from md.com. I'm actually super surprised I was able to get that domain name. And, we talk about simple stuff like that. Like, you should go to Google Domains right now and check if you can buy your name. Like, I bought my name, I bought my wife's name, I bought my kid's name, I bought my brother's name. It's like $10 a year, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, and actually, so I bought my cousin's name and I gave it to him for a wedding gift, right? $10. But think about it. He's in marketing and he doesn't have his own website, right? It's like,
Yep.
yeah.
No, that's a great tip. It's $10 to get a Google domain, and I got my name. I just had to insert my middle initial, but I was pretty happy with it. And again, it's $10 a year. I mean, even if you never use it, you know, someone with your name might come along years down the road and maybe give you 10 grand for it. Who knows? Um, but the goal
Mm-hmm.
is to start a business, right?
Yeah.
And you mentioned something super important, which is you really need to discover what your passion. Not everyone's going to do real estate, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
we are. You want to discover what your passion is, and then try to build a business around that. But that discovery phase can be can take years because you don't spend the time to do it. So I just always encourage everyone is script it out, write it out. What lights you up? What are you super passionate about? And I firmly believe that you could build a business around your passion. You may not be able to replace your income, but by learning different ways to make money, i.e. investing in real estate, or stocks or whatever it is, you can certainly at some point replace or exceed your W-2 income. Would you agree?
Yeah. Yeah, Brian. And I have always told people, they're like, how do you find what you want to do or where you want to go? I was like, I just do what sounds fun, what sounds interesting, and the money comes eventually, right? And a lot of times I know people are worried about working for free, but when I started with my partner, Dr. Peter Kim, I was working for free. I was like, he said he needed some help with his Facebook group. I was like, yeah, I'm happy to talk to people. I'll post every once in a while. There's not really a ton of requirements. It's not like a job. Just did it here and there. And then eventually we created a 7-figure online course together and conferences and podcasts. And we created this private equity company, Ascent Equity Group, that is probably an 8-figure business already, in like 16 months. So don't be afraid to reach out to people and try, and the worst, a lot of times there's concern that you're going to waste your time. But so I have so many, I know you guys hear this podcast, you're like, yeah, this guy's pretty successful. I have so many failed projects, tons. There's like skeletons in my closet, half done projects. And like, for example, my blog, right? I was like, oh, this is my partner, Peter, he started a blog and he got very successful, 8-figure business. It's like, I could do a blog. It doesn't look that hard. And I did it. And it wasn't hard, but it sucked. Like every night, the night before, I would be like sitting like, what am I going to talk about? Or I'd have 50 headlines. I know exactly what to talk about.
Mm.
I just don't want to write. I hate writing. I'm not a writer naturally,
Yeah.
and it's not something that gives me enjoyment. But at least I think I did it like, I don't know, like a couple weeks, like maybe like 6 months, right? But now I am such a better writer, even though I canceled my blog, right? The quick story, I started a master's program and I forgot to submit one of my homework, and the professor's like, hey, where's this homework? It's like, shoot, I forgot to send it in, and I had to write it all. And I wrote 5 pages in like 4 hours, which is insane. Normally a 5-page paper would take me like a month. But because I had done the blog and I had to write under pressure, it had given me that skill. So even if you have something that doesn't work out, it's gonna give you future skills, and it'll kind of build on that.
Yeah, that's a great lesson or great share, to learn the lessons there. And yeah, sometimes we see people who are having success and it's like they just, you just roll out of bed that way, and nothing could be further from the truth. We all have to, attempt and fail and get back, and not so necessarily fail, but just, take take steps backwards, learn and have seminars. I mean, I always say that the only time you fail is when you quit. That's the only time you're ever gonna fail. Um, AscentEquityGroup.com. Talk a little bit about what you're doing there with your doctor investors.
Mhm.
They're investing and you're finding the deals. Is that kind of how it's working?
Yeah, so we have all these relationships that we've built up over time,
Mm-hmm.
and because we've placed a lot of money, a lot of equity, that they trust us. Because in the starting, it's very difficult to get these relationships. It's all handshake deals. Someone will come up to you and say, "Hey, I have this deal," and you'll say, "Okay, I will bring you 5 million or 10 million." That person who comes to you is really sticking their neck on the line, right? Because if you don't get the money, they're screwed, right? They
Yeah.
have to scramble they could lose the deal. A lot of times they have money like a hard commitment, right? Money that they're putting into the deal saying that they're going to close it. And if they don't, that money's lost, right? And this is significant. Like $500,000, $1 million. That's a lot of money, right?
Sure.
So we've done this, we're about to close our seventh deal.
Hmm.
And so we've been doing this for a while. So we find the deals, we vet them, we work with the sponsor to really optimize it. So we have lender connections, private preferred equity connections, and then most importantly, that's what a lot of people do. A lot of people that kind of raise equity and then they kind of disappear because they only make their money on the front end, right? So they go to the next deal. But we really follow the deal and make sure it's being optimized for investors. So for example, this is probably going to sound crazy to you. We do weekly property management calls. Like a lot of people didn't even have that set up for themselves and they had to set it up for us because
Yeah.
we want to make sure it's optimized, right? So if if you're following things on a week by week basis, I don't do that for my own property. Like I mean, couldn't care less, right? But for something that's we're buying $32 million property, we really want to know if there's a change, right? We're doing monthly financials. We're going through all the numbers of the property, right? And then lastly, we're looking at the property, going to it at least once a quarter, right? And can't really hide anything at that point, right? And it's not that we would ever work with someone that we're worried about hiding anything, but we, trust but verify. And the type of deals, the type of structure we do is called a joint venture,
Mm-hmm.
which it's more than just a partnership. It's saying that, hey, because we're bringing all the money and we usually bring up 95% of the money for the whole deal, we get what is called major decision rights, where you get to decide small stuff like what does the logo look like, but the big stuff like the budget,
Yeah.
capital calls, meaning do people need to put in extra money into the deal?
Are you guys in the deal all the way to the end or whatever the
Yep,
exit strategy is? Okay. And what
definitely.
type of deals are you, what type of, what class of asset are you looking at? And then is
Hmm.
there certain locations that you like?
Yeah. So we do what is called value add,
Hmm.
meaning you go in, you renovate the units, right? And we think that's how you unlock the potential. We, in terms of asset classes, we do multifamily. So, apartment complex you and I would live in, but kind of middle of the ground, not the high end,
Yep.
right? The ones that doctors live in, right? Not the low end, right? The ones that you really got to worry about crime. So kind of the middle ground. We go in, we renovate it, make it nicer. So it's value add, multifamily, and the class you would say call it a B, right? So
B.
it's like the Goldilocks class, kind of in the middle, not too bad, not too good. So then there's a lot of room, and we think that is really key right now because when there's a recession, people say, oh, this house is maybe a little bit too expensive, and they go down to an apartment. And if you're going down from an apartment, or sorry, a house to an apartment, you're not going to get the nicest apartment in the area. You're going to get kind of a nice middle ground, right?
Yeah.
And then there's also those people who are living in the really nice apartment. They're like, yeah, maybe I shouldn't be spending $3,000 a month on rent. I'm going to go down to like 1,500. So we kind of like that middle ground.
Yeah, that's a great point. The A's go down to the B's, or I
Hmm.
mean, sometimes even the C's or, the C pluses. So
Yeah.
awesome stuff. Maybe, you're doing a $32 million deal, it sounds like.
Yeah. So the deal is we have like 2 spots left. So it might even be full, but it's 312 units in Oklahoma. It's a
Nice.
506C, meaning that I'm able to talk about it live. So
I
yeah,
should have asked you that. Sorry.
yeah. Sorry, 1 second. My door just opened. Yeah,
All
yeah. I
right,
mean,
editors, we're gonna cut this portion out. He's coming back in. All right, we'll just cut. We'll cut that out. Don't worry about it.
yeah.
All right.
Okay.
So yeah,
Yeah.
it's a 506C.
Yeah, so it's a 506C, meaning that I'm able to talk about it and kind of advertise it. So that's why I can give you details. Other deals are 506B, and it just means it's a different type of investment. One's not good compared to other. It's just a lot more paperwork on our end to get the 506C done.
Oh,
But so I'll talk about it just so you can get a general idea of what kind of deals we look at. So
yeah.
312 unit Oklahoma City. It's with a sponsor. They've bought over $2 billion worth of real estate, exited over 1.7 average IRR, which is a return metric, is about 22%. And the one thing we really like about this deal, it's a loan assumption. And get this, it's a 2.9% interest rate fixed for 9 years. 9. So that means we can ride out anything that the economy throws at us.
Yeah.
And to make it even better, it's 4 years of interest only. So that means we're only paying interest on the loan for 4 years. And we hope to sell it in that time. So,
Awesome.
because of our relationships and because that this is actually our 6th deal with this group, we're able to kind of cherry pick the best of their deals that we like.
Nice. So the sponsor comes to you, you do the raise, and you do your thing. So that's when you
Exactly.
say you're not active in. The sponsor is actively managing the
Yep.
property.
Yeah,
Okay.
and what we do is kind of manage the manager. So,
Yeah.
that's why we're trying to make sure that they're hitting our numbers. And, I like to think about it in medicine and entrepreneurship. Sometimes it's just better to get more eyeballs, even if you have experts, having a couple extra eyeballs just make sure that nothing gets mixed.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Do you have any other, that's great. I mean, you've done quite a bit in the last 16 months, you and your partner, Dr. Peter Kim, you've mentioned him. And any other interests or ventures that you're taking on that you haven't shared? It sounds like you got a lot going on.
Yeah, yeah. I starting 6 months ago, I joined an NFT crypto company,
Mm.
and we mostly focus on consulting. So trying to help Web 2. So pretty much every company out there switch to Web 3. So right now, it's taken kind of a hit as has everything, but I really think the future is with technology. So let me give you an example. A lot of people are like, "Oh, NFTs, that's weird, right?" But have you ever bought a football ticket or baseball ticket, right? And been one secondhand, especially, you're like, is this real? Right? A lot of people get scammed, but if you buy it online on the blockchain, then you could know for sure, right? Or are you an artist that sells your works, right? After you sell your work originally, you don't get any piece of that, right? But as an NFT, you can put in what is royalties. So anywhere from 2.5 to 10%. So anytime someone buys or sells your work, you get a 10% cut. That's pretty sweet, right? I mean, if you created it, I think you deserve a little bit of it. Or do you have a membership group, right? And you want to be able to find out who's a member, who's not, right? And you want to assign a value to that membership. So there's this one membership called Proof Collective, and it lets you go to live events and all this stuff, and and there's only 1,000 available, right? So over time it's worth more and more, right? And then anytime it buys or sells, the original company gets a royalty. So they've made tens of thousands of dollars from royalty, and it just goes back into the membership.
Yeah. The whole NFT thing is mind blowing to me. So I'm glad that you explained it, and yeah, tons of opportunity there, right? Coming up. And then you mentioned crypto as well. It's not something I invest in personally. I just don't understand it, but it's definitely an opportunity.
Yeah, and maybe 15 years ago, someone was like, I forgot who it was. Maybe it was Sears CEO. He's like, who would buy anything online, right? And now, how ridiculous does that sound?
Pretty ridiculous. Yeah. Pretty since the last I don't think I've seen this Sears is in the tank. So um yeah. Brene, let's talk a little bit about I got a couple questions for you.
Hmm.
You're very successful, did it in a short amount of time, but you've really been this way, it sounds like since you were 5 years old, when you had this dream, this vision to become a doctor. What would you say? Do you have any habits or routines? I don't want to talk about morning routines necessarily, but do you have anything that you do on a daily basis that really drives you towards success?
Yeah, I have for years and years tried to be a creature of habit
Hmm.
and try to do like getting stuff done and trying to do all these operating systems. But a lot of the reasons that I have been able to be successful is because I have been able to be creative. And so I actually specifically don't schedule stuff on certain days at certain times, so I can just sit there and be creative. And in addition to that, I consume a lot of stuff. So I consume like 30 to 40 hours of podcasts. I read a ton of articles. And that's because I really think that the disruptions, the innovative ideas come from outside of a certain industry. So, for example, Uber, they weren't taxi pros, they weren't taxi experts, right? They saw a problem and they went for it, right? And Airbnb and all these companies, they came from someone outside of the industry saying, hey, why do we do this a certain way, right? And or like Apple or all these companies. So I try to consume things from different sources, right? I read a lot of architecture stuff, and so like Johnny Ive, one of the head designers for Apple used to be in architecture, So I think I try to leave time for creativity and then read from sources outside of really my main industries, which
That
now actually the industries I'm in are pretty expensive.
Yeah, no, that's super important. I'm glad you brought that up. Allowing time to be creative, and let your creative juices flow. It's all in us, and a lot of us don't do that, and for me it's writing. I like to journal, I like to script stuff out and just let whatever's inside of me out, even if I'm never going to use it, at least it gets out, on paper. So that's a great share. And then consuming, you're doing a lot of reading and podcasting and just consuming content and constantly learning, and working that brain muscle. um, do you believe, or do you have coaches and mentors? Is that something that's part of your life?
Yeah, and this is something that I have really tried to go for this year. So,
Mhm.
especially with our equity company, we have, so someone told us that we're raising, university level money with kindergarten level systems. So, we kind of just go out, we get on the phone, we're like, hey, we have this really good investment, but you can only scale that so much, I mean, the nice thing is, I almost always pick up the phone. So people are surprised. They're like, "Oh, I thought I'd get an answering machine." I was like, "No, no, I'm here." But there's emails and automations that we don't necessarily need to do, right? So, if someone signs up, they should be able to do things automatically, and they don't necessarily want to get on the phone for that specific thing. So our thoughts are, I could figure it out. There's an active campaign course or all this stuff, and that's how I have been in the past. But it would take me, I don't know, 20, 30 hours to watch the course and put all that stuff. So what is my time worth, right? So I think a lot of us, and I know a lot of your listeners are W-2s, right? And they haven't really actually even calculated their hour, their dollar per hour, right? So easy thing to do, take your annual salary and divide it by 2,000, right? So if you're making 50,000, you're making $25 an hour, right?
Yeah.
And so on. So, or take your hourly salary and multiply it by 200,
Yep.
2,000. Yep. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. I literally shot a YouTube video on this exact topic 2 days ago. So it hasn't
Sweet.
gone out yet, but just breaking down what your hourly rate is so you know your worth, right?
Yeah.
And a
Yeah.
lot of it is for outsourcing stuff. If you're making 50 grand a year, that's $25 an hour. Well, anything that's $25 an hour or less, you need to hire that out.
Yeah, and that's your hourly wage. If you want me to do more work than the works I'm scheduled, you're gonna have to pay me more than that, right?
That's right.
I I'm not gonna work if I'm making 25 an hour and you ask me to do more work, you gotta be paying me like 40 or more, right?
Yeah. No, great. I love that. I absolutely love that. And by the way, for everyone listening, if you're doing that calculation, if you want to make $1 million a year, that's $500 an hour. So if you break it down to the hourly, it doesn't look like, well, how am I going to make $1 million a year? Well, look at the hourly. Like, look at the hourly, right? Charge your worth.
Yeah.
I know you're consuming a lot.
Mhm.
Do you read, or is it mostly podcasts and articles? Because I just would just like you to share anything that you think would be valuable to the audience in terms of what you like to consume that you could share.
Yeah, so I do mostly articles. I find that in books, it's full of a lot of fluff, and it's good fluff, right? Like you can't just have like most like say like getting stuff done. You could probably get that in like a couple pages, right? But you need
Yeah.
the fluff, you need the stories to help cement it, right? I like articles because you only have a couple pages to get what your intent is kind of across, right?
Mhm.
And so I do like books, but it's hard for me to consume as many. But that's something I've been working on as well.
It takes a long time to read a book, right? So you can get a
It
lot of
does,
stuff
yeah,
in an article for
yeah,
sure. You know,
yeah. You
Audible
can, yeah, you can't see my library, but it's like probably 300 books, and like 280 of them have not been read.
have not been read. Okay. You'll get there. You'll get
Yeah,
there.
yeah,
I just want to mention the website one more time for your podcast, from md.com, which
yeah.
you were able to grab that off of Google. Awesome.
Mhm.
Um, do you ever plan to stop practicing medicine?
Yeah, people are surprised by how much I actually practice. So I do zero point 0.8 full time, so I do 10 to 12-hour shifts. I
Okay.
used to actually, when I started all this stuff, I used to work double full time, right? Because in the starting, as you know, you've started multiple businesses, you don't make much money, right? And usually you're lucky if you kind of break even in year three, year two, depending on what business you have. Fortunately for our Ascent Equity Group, we were in the black like right away,
Yeah.
So I used to work a lot, and now I'm down to zero point 0.8. I'll probably do like zero point 0.6, zero point 0.5 to zero point 0.6 by the end of the year. But I'll probably practice at some point. The problem is it's you want to practice enough so that your skills don't rust, right? So I'm gonna have to try to find that balance.
Yeah. It sounds like something you still like to do and you're passionate about. So
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Yeah.
yeah, follow your passion. So, all right, I got one more question for you. It might be too early in the game to ask you this, but you know, based on everything that's already happened in your life since became a doctor, would you have done anything differently up to this point?
No, that's a great question. And I think a lot of times we think about our past and we're like, oh, I wish I would have done this differently. And a lot of times you just cringe. You're like, oh, I can't believe I said that. I can't believe I did that. Right.
Yeah.
But then I look at my life right now and I'm very satisfied, very joyful with what's happened. And, old me had to make those mistakes and mess up and learn those lessons for me to be where I am. So, you know, I, after I cringe, I'm like, yeah, that's kind of sad, but like, or frustrating, but I had to go through those. So I actually appreciate all the good and the bad. So yeah.
That's a very enlightened answer, and I'm glad I asked you because a lot of the times I'll get, well, I wish I would have started sooner, and you're content, you're happy right where you are. You're right where you're supposed to be. That's great. Pranay, this has been tremendous. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to see if you had any final thoughts, anything you wanted to share that I didn't get to ask you that you wanted to leave us here before we wrap up.
Well, especially with doctors, the what we do a lot of times is like, okay, I'm going to start a podcast. Let me go research all the different mics I can get. Let me go research, and then you get in this like this black hole or this treadmill where you're just looking up more information. You're getting another book. You're getting another conference. you want to just get started, right? And I'm sure you've talked about this in the past, but there was this study where there was this pottery class, right? And he split up the class in two groups. So one, they said, you're going to have a final project, get started right away. It's one, ceramic piece, this pottery, just make it the best you can, right? And then another one, it says every 2 days you have a project that's due, right? And make sure you get your pottery done. And at the very end, you're going to do a big project. So thoughts on who did a better one? It's the people that did a new one every day, right? They had more iterations, right? I promise you your iteration 50 is going to be better than your first one. Doesn't matter if you had a million hours to do that first project. It's just you don't know what's going to stick. You don't know what you're going to like. And also you evolve over time. I know this is your second podcast. And so it's not because your first podcast wasn't good. It's just different, right? And you pivoted and you found that out over time, right? And I'm sure this podcast is way better than your last one just because you have more reps, right? You've done better. Now you know what questions to ask. You're smoother. You're just more insightful, right? And so just get started. Like record. Like if you're starting a podcast, for example, take out your AirPods or whatever microphone you have. Don't even worry about getting one from Amazon, and interview your wife, your husband, your spouse, your brother. To start interviewing people. And I promise you in a month or two, you'll be pretty damn good.
That's great insight. You don't need much to start a podcast. It's pretty darn easy. Your phone, you can sit in your closet if you need a soundproof or a good sound quality. But just record. Just record. It's the experts say that about YouTube too. It's not about the equipment. It's about what you're saying, right? Like the content. And imperfect action, beats perfect action every time, right? Or not taking any. So just do it, I think, is the message that you're given, which is a great one. And great way to wrap up this episode. I really appreciate you sharing your insight today, your valuable time, and I learned a lot, and I'm looking forward to checking out your show.
Thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll have you back on again, hopefully. And everyone, thanks for tuning in. Make it a great day.